Hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm alright. Okay, so that was Ain't Nobody Straight in LA, a song by the Miracles. Is anybody here familiar with the Miracles? You are? Can you name any songs by them? Sorry to put you on the spot. But...
Nope, I can't. I just know them as Not the Temptations.
Alright, well, so we're getting closer. They're not the Temptations. They did, you've probably heard some of their songs, like, there's that one, I'm just a love machine, and I don't work for nobody but you. You know, like that kind of sound. They've got, they're kind of very emblematic of the 70s in a lot of ways, and that is from an album, City of Angels, about Los Angeles, of course. And it goes to show two things. First of all, it shows, hi, how are you? First of all, it shows that this kind of genre of music that addressed the large gay populations in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and New York was popular during this period. More so than it was in the 80s, and more so than it even is today. And it also shows that nobody's straight in LA, which is also a core theme of some films that we watched.
The messenger has arrived.
Thank you very much. So what I did the last time I taught this class was pretty torturous for the people in the room because I did back-to-back a screening of Scorpio Rising and then Sex Garage and then LA Plays Itself. And if I'm correct, out of the whole class, which was bigger than this one, there were only about 2 or 3 who made it through the entire time. So this time I split it up a bit. But I hope that everyone still has some recollection of having watched Scorpio Rising. And I encourage you all to think about the symbolism of it and music. Does anybody have any thoughts on Scorpio Rising? I'm sorry, I know that you're at a disadvantage because I think that you joined the class after. But
well, I just want to say I've been cranking the soundtrack. The immaculate taste from Kenneth Anger on that one.
Immaculate music, indeed. The music is a pretty core part of it, and a core reason that it was so influential and inspirational. And we'll get into it later, but it is considered by some to be the first music video. So that's a point of fame for it. But the music also corresponds to the video in a lot of ways. Anybody have any opinions on that? On that connection there?
The one I remember most strongly about what you're talking about is that there was a song about a leader who wasn't following the leader, something along that lines during the like Hitler sequence.
Yeah, I'll follow him. That was fun during the finale. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of symbolism in the music, in the visuals, and a lot that's told indirectly. And the most important thing to understand about the director is that the guy who directed it was just a really weird dude all around. Kenneth Anger. He's one of the more popular and more well-known people who's going to show up on this course, probably by merit of the fact that what he made was very underground, but still not pornographic, so it stood the test of time to a greater extent. But there's a lot of themes in this that very much show us the underbelly of 70s American, 60s American society. And we see a lot of themes like Nazism, some violent and repressed sexuality and eroticism, and a connection between violence and eroticism. And probably most confusingly, there's imagery of Christ and the occult thrown into all of this. So it was a controversial movie, even more when it came out than it is today. Curiously, one of the people who hated it the most was the American Nazi Party, who demanded that the LAPD investigate the movie for indecency after it came out. And as I mentioned, it was also incredibly influential. Probably the most influential of any movie we've watched yet. Because in addition to all the major directors it inspired, Scorsese among them, it's also kind of arguably the starting point of this gay biker subculture, which you're going to see a lot over the course of this semester. Biker culture grew largely out of these 50s celebrities. These two are mostly responsible for it. You have Marlon Brando and James Dean, both of whom were these rebel icons for young men and these cinematic characters. And in Scorpio Rising, they're basically models of masculinity that the men aspire to. And you actually see very clear reference to that tilt of his hat that Marlon Brando has in a lot of the shots. But there's also a sexual edge to their relationship with these figures. And this is expressed just as much through the visuals as through the music. When they're doing what Kenneth Anger called this American ritual, when they're treating their bikes, sorry, can you put the phone away? When they're treating their bikes and fixing the wrenches and whatnot. As you can tell, I don't know a great amount about automobiles. But while they're doing all that bike nonsense, they're set to the song "My Boyfriend's Back," which is a song from the perspective of a woman talking about somebody else who's going to be the source of her strength and her masculinity. So you kind of get the sense that this bike is the source of their masculinity. That it's all a bit of a facade, which it plays with as the movie goes on with other music choices. He's just reading comic books in his room while he's playing Devil in Disguise, and he's got all these pictures of cooler guys behind him, who else? And of course there's Jesus as well. There's a comparison between how these people followed their rebel gods to the OG rebel god, Jesus, how people follow him. The song Rebel Lord is actually what's playing over the many of these Jesus shots. There's a complex historical relationship between Christianity and kind of homoerotic sexual repression. But you kind of see Marlon Brando and James Dean almost becoming the Jesus of these men. And again, all shown, not told, all through music. This is what I mentioned with My Boyfriend's Back playing. There's another song, Blue Velvet, during what's interesting because this is one of the most erotic scenes in the movie, the one where you see the most skin, but they're not taking off clothes, they're putting on clothes. And you kind of get the sense that their sexiness comes from the performance they put on as bikers, from their clothing. The song itself, Blue Velvet, is again subverting the gender of these men because it's a song from the perspective of a man who's attracted to a woman because of the blue velvet that she's wearing. So Black Velvet is basically these men's blue velvet. And there's a lot of these homoerotic shots, and it's a sense that it's culminating towards something, towards some grand act of violence and eroticism, which it is, because you end up with one of the most curious sex scenes in the entire course, where they're squirting mustard on a man as they take off his clothes. And does, I might be crazy, but does this remind anyone else of Myra Breckenridge? Here are people using a tool which brings them no physical pleasure as a substitute for the penis to exert authority over, I don't know, this kind of looks like a yuppie, I'm not entirely sure what his deal is. And then of course, the connection between their repression and their eroticism and this violence culminates with the song Torture that's playing, which is a song about how torturous love can be, but in this case, it takes on a different meaning. And after this act of primal violence, by this point there's already been some imagery, but it really amps up towards the end, the Nazi imagery. And again, this is a point where I've been harping on this a lot, because the 60s and the 70s do seem recent, and they seem comparable to, our culture today. But this is in the middle of the 60s, less than 20 years after the end of the Holocaust. Like, this is a very, very provocative imagery to use. It was a lot more edgy then than it would be today. And there's also this connection to homosexuality as well. The homosexuals were one of many groups deemed Untermensch by the Nazis. And the Holocaust was really central to queer self-consciousness in general. Whether this is an instance of queer self-consciousness, perhaps one of you will argue about in your final paper, but I'm not entirely convinced that it is. And this slide, I don't remember being empty, but I suppose it was. But basically, yeah, you have these three symbols, Jesus, of Hitler, and of the leather-wearing biker. And rather than ending at the scene of this violence, it ends when that song is playing, I'll Follow Him, and they start trying to follow him. They start trying to actually be bikers. You see them, for, curiously, the first time in the entire movie, actually riding bikes, which you'd think as bikers would be a bigger part of it. And it ends abruptly when one of them falls off the bike and an ambulance is coming. So they're a pretty pale imitation of those men. And so this is a particular interpretation of Scorpio rising. I find myself, more so than most people, seeing it as a kind of self-referential parody of this subculture. But we should still take it very seriously, because this subculture grew and evolved and expressed itself in a lot of different ways throughout the 70s. I'm sure you've seen certain Finnish artists' depictions of leather-clad bikers. And there's also the film Knights in Black Leather by Peter Berlin, which we'll get into later. But this brings us to several years later, because as I mentioned, there were several people inspired by Kenneth Anger, Scorsese among them. And when you look at how Scorsese uses music in his movies, it's really not hard to see the connection. I should perhaps mention that I am among the influences of Kenneth Anger, and indeed, this is your instructor's Halloween costume last year. It was my best Scorpio rising fit. Most of the beads have not survived the years, but it looks like it at least said something at one point. But with that point aside, we'll return to the presentation here. And it kind of brings us to the movie which I think is most clearly inspired by Kenneth Anger in the entire course, Sex Garage. And I know a fair amount of you were there for Sex Garage. Did anyone have any thoughts or reflections on Sex Garage? Certainly a strange movie, long build-up. Did it deserve the 1 star?
I think it was definitely, well, it was kind of interesting that, I don't know, it was probably the most unique porno I've ever seen. Just in that, well, one, it is very focusing on, like, body parts, but, like, just individual body parts, and not necessarily ones associated with sex. Like, sometimes they just zoom in on, like, a limb and, like, hold that shot for a while. I liked how the camera was kind of weird and shaky. And another thing I really appreciated was kind of this alternating between, like, I guess like classic Beethoven, I think it was, and like sort of more freakish avant-garde music throughout the movie. It kind of definitely evoked a lot of emotions and made it a pretty interesting watch.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the movie is that it's funny. It has a sense of comedic timing with this constant coitus interruptus. You're watching him pleasure himself in the shower to classical music, and then when you're least expecting it, just cuts to another shot, sans music. It's that constant on and off. Did anyone think that was anyone surprised by the first sequence? For a course called Gay Films of the 70's?
Oh yeah.
Would you, you haven't spoken much to this class, do you have
Well, yeah, I think I was surprised, yes.
Yeah.
I was not expecting that.
yeah, some, a woman giving her best attempt at head. And it was certainly a valiant attempt. It's interestingly not the only instance of, a heterosexual, heteroerotic sex that we're going to see during this course. Did you find that interesting as well?
I think it like stood in really stark contrast with everything else in the film and like everything else from the era we've seen because it felt so unerotic. Like it felt like devoid of passion in many ways.
It did, and it kind of sets up that expectation too, because you have this very unerotic sex scene, and you have this constant tension, music flashing back and forth, and then it eventually gets to a part where you keep seeing the hood medallion of this car. It's cutting to this car, and you get the sense that something is coming into his sex garage, into this surrealistic mind palace of sexual desires that you can't fully tell between reality and fantasy. Something's coming to interrupt him from his naive sense of, you'd think, heterosexuality. Maybe he's going to have some gay awakening. And it all seems to start to make sense when the man walks out of the car that you've been seeing the hood medallion. There's kind of a musical change. He looks at him erotically. But this is not the completion of his realization of his own fantasies. The problem wasn't simply the gender of the person that he was having sex with. What he wanted was to use sex as an opportunity to show his power in a similar way to the men in Scorpio Rising, and in a similar way to Myra Breckenridge. He wants sex to be an act of domination over another person. And you end up giving that to the sex scene with this man, where there's another man who arrived on a bicycle, and the two of them are, they have this man dressed up in panties, they're emasculating him, they bend him over a toilet during one scene, and in probably one of the most remarkable scenes, in this scene because the fact that this is one right foot, and to the right of it, one left foot, both of their feet are on his neck. There's no penetrative sex going on, but it still feels sexual because it's not about any physical sensation. It's about domination over this man. And then there's also all these shots intercut, but it's not Jesus and it's not James Dean this time. It's advertisements. It's traffic. It's almost like urban capitalist society captured in these individual shots, which gives you a sense that this whole thing is a sexual machine, and that synthesis between sex and the machine comes at the end when he masturbates onto the seat of his bike and rubs it into the cushion, which is probably one of the more remarkable visual images you'll ever see in any movie. It's also, again, the first time you've heard a sentence like that in a classroom setting, I hope. all of this reflects on Fred Halstead, on the man who made it, who is very different from Wakefield Poole, but was, as a matter of fact, in his time, more popular than Wakefield Poole, more popular than Peter Berlin, who we'll get into later. He's more popular than all of these other contemporary figures. It gets to a point where, actually, if I can read from this essay, which came with the Blu-ray copy, just a story, anecdotal evidence. But in 2018, I was setting up a screening at my local leather bar. We need one of those. And a leather-clad man approached me, teeming with territorial contempt. "What are you doing here?" he barked. "We're setting up for a screening," I explained. Then, looking up at him, I followed the films of Fred Halstead. The leather man, who was maybe in his mid-50s, transformed. His face melted from rage to reverence. A warm glow emanated from him, and a generational threshold was breached. For Fred was holy to a homosexual generation. So he was a really influential man, but he represents a much less friendly version of homoeroticism than any of his contemporaries, really. As a matter of fact, when asked to self-identify, he preferred the word pervert to homosexual, which I think both of his films would really show. He was more of a brand than a person. He had very careful control over the image of himself that he created. He was this gruff, like working class, leather daddy, provocateur. And his biographical information is also very interesting. This is a man who grew up poor, moving constantly. And there's one anecdote from his high school life. I wasn't able to verify it, but basically, I'll just repeat it as fact because it's funny. In high school, he ran for student body president on this platform of like overthrowing his school's WASP majority, forming, as he called it, this coalition between black students and hillbillies to elect him. And then he won and cut funding to the sports and kept up his shenanigans until he ended up getting expelled. So this is a pretty good villain origin story for him. He didn't take shit from anybody, least of all other homosexuals. And, you know, Sex Garage demonstrates that. In Wakefield Poole, with his movies, you have this sense that gay sex is normal, it's natural, and it's beautiful. With Halstead, you kind of see the seedier side of gay culture, highlighting violence, highlighting repression, highlighting physical domination. And his own explanation for why he made this film, LA Plays Itself, was that he wanted to expose people not just to the nice side of gay culture, but to BDSM and have them think about it and like what it means. This movie was so influential, I'm talking about both Sex Garage and LA Plays Itself, that they were actually played together at the Museum of Modern Art, as I mentioned when I was telling you all to set the scene. In case you were wondering what Salvador Dali said, who was at the screening, his reaction afterwards was just to repeat new information for me to himself. I have no doubt that he enjoyed the movie. The screening actually was also met outside of the building with protests by gay activists who said it demeaned their community. And Halstead did tremendously enjoy demeaning the gay community. He used the word faggot to refer to himself and others. He called himself at different points a fascist, a left-wing anarchist, and a libertarian for good measure. But he had this very firm cult following because of all this provocation. And I think LA Plays Itself, you really get into his character and what he thinks of his sex. And I'm going to wager, for most people in this room, this is going to be the first horror porno you've seen. Psychological thriller might be a better term for it. But yeah, like Boys in the Sand, it's divided into these entirely different sections with their own plot lines. there's part one, which is entirely different from part two. In fact, they're not even connected in terms of characters or plot. But does anyone want to talk about part one? Maybe ways it reminded you of Boys in the Sand, maybe ways it seemed different from Boys in the Sand. And I'm talking about everything from the first shots of nature to the bulldozer.
It kind of, the same vibe is very, sorry, did
You're good. So it's fine. Never mind.
sorry. Yeah, it was kind of the same vibe. It was very much all just shots of nature and like these very like pristine, like untouched environments. It's very idealized and very almost like I don't know, choreographed.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very idealized, very natural. Did anyone want to point out another way it might have been similar to Wakefield Pool?
Attractive dream guy appears out of nowhere and
Yeah.
immediately proceeds to sex.
Exactly, yeah. It's a very it's very idyllic, set very well to the classic Japanese music, as it was called. But yeah, it's very idyllic.
Both kind of had to do with the natural world. I mean, in Boys in the Sand, you had those like sex scenes where then like someone would like fade in, or no, you had like a background scene of nature and so like someone would fade in, sort of. And this, it kind of had like a whole Adam and Steve setup where
Yeah.
they're like playing in these pools in the woods, and there's there's birds and flowers and everything. It's very
Yeah.
very picturesque.
There's shots of live bugs as well, shots of life all around it. And another similarity is in the sexual roles. Much like Boys in the Sand, both of them take the active and passive roles at different points during the scene. And it also emphasizes that naturalness. One difference that's pretty key, though, is that the sex scene is actually happening in LA Plays itself. That this is not just a fantasy of one person, but the real life, the real cruising that you would see in a place like this. And for those of you who don't know, we'll get into this more later in the course as well, but cruising is basically this thing which was much more popular in the 70's, in the pre-HIV world, than it is today, where there were select spots. They could be anywhere. They could be the entirety of Fire Island, basically. Certain streets in Los Angeles, certain streets in New York were known for it, where gay men, simply through these rituals of eye contact, movement, would figure out who they wanted to hook up with, where they would go. And it was a lot of this nonverbal, learned physical culture. And that's the first scene in LA Place itself. And then it's interrupted. And I already told you, but does anyone want to get extra credit for saying what they're interrupted by?
You talking about the tractors?
Yeah,
whatever those things are called?
Again, I'm showing my limited understanding of automobiles, but
Yeah. Actually, I
certainly.
was gonna ask you something about that, and about the director. For that first scene, it's all like natural and stuff, and then these loud ass bulldozers come through. And I was thinking, is that supposed to be sort of like an analogy to how later there's this like sort of much less, it's not to say that like BDSM isn't something that people are naturally attracted to, but it sort of seems like he's saying that it's like this sort of man-made desire or whatever for power.
No, absolutely. There's just like there is with Sex Garage, there's this very direct visual connection, shot to shot, between urbanization, capitalism, machines, and perversion and BDSM and power dynamics. And I think this movie is such an interesting movie about Los Angeles because it talks about this, phony hyper-capitalist place with this underbelly through sex, but you still get an understanding of how impersonal and how cold it is just through the kind of sex there. But that intro sets up that there's this ravenous, growing thing, this beast of a city that's destroying this natural, serene cruising. And the second half has, this after this coitus interruptus, you know. And I'll mention, by the way, I know I have a tendency to go on to diversions, but it seems very natural to screen them in this order: nature, interruption, and then the city. But when they screened it in MoMA, it was actually the inverse. So I definitely prefer this version. But yeah, you get this second half, which is focused so much more on perversion, on sex as power. You have this scene, which is probably emblematic more than any other scene of the entire second half, where there's no sexual contact whatsoever, just a licking of the boot, but it feels almost more erotic than the actual sex scenes, because, as the director himself, as Fred Halstead said, sex isn't about coming, it's about power. And for those who thought this is a terrifying dynamic between those two people, you might be surprised to know that his boyfriend is actually the one playing the innocent Texan, and he's playing the abuser. So what that says about their relationship, I don't know, but you know, they stayed together for quite a long time.
Wait, is the Texan the one that is like licking the boot there?
Yeah, so the Texan, the one who's saying, has all that dialogue about, I want to spend my last $2 on beans, like that guy.
I thought it was the inverse, because the guy who was like doing the whipping and stuff, he was wearing a cowboy hat.
I guess maybe he's the cowboy now.
I thought that he was being like hired to dom someone.
I think it's kind of, well, there's all these scenes of the exterior with the Texan, and you see kind of like sketchy areas in LA. It's definitely not a flattering portrayal of LA, but in the dialogue, the Texan his dialogue is mostly, sounds quite mentally stunted, but for lack of better euphemism, but the dialogue of the other person throughout that is focusing on, how can I get you away from talking to other people? How can I get you closer into my circle and take advantage of your vulnerability? You know, he says, oh, you need a job? I know someone with a job. I'll show you the ropes, you know? And that's intercut humorously with him actually tying up the Texan. But yeah, like I said, so many of these sex scenes are not really sex scenes. They challenge our ideas of sex. They challenge the average, Wakefield Pools fan's conceptions of what sex is. And the finale of it, I decided not to include any pictures from the fisting because I'm going to talk about it for a while, so it might get a bit awkward. But it's just a bit distracting, and I don't think it would go good on YouTube either. But in the film, I didn't catch it this time. It might have been a different version, but it is established that this man, who is this Texan who's being tied up, is eventually found as a tortured dead body just in a closet. And it's after that you have the final penultimate sex scene, which starts with Fred Halstead, shot to look very strong and imposing, sat down, naked, masturbating. And you think that this is going to lead to, some penetrative sex act. But he completes the entire act of masturbation alone, and then goes into the other room where the Texan is, who, those of you who were there to see the scene might understand why there was a body double for the Texan, because that's certainly the deepest fist you're going to see in this course, I can promise you that. But I think what's interesting is the purpose of including a fisting scene here, which is to show this is purely domination, and the fact that it came after what people think of as the conventional ends of sex. It comes after ejaculation, just shows that there's no other incentive, there's no confounding variable. It's purely domination and power. Another reason I wanted to bring this up is because Wakefield Poole also included a scene of fisting in his film Moving. But if you read his work, his description of why he included that scene is actually, I think, one of the most beautiful passages in the book, because he says that fisting shows better than anything else what love actually is, which is not some, eternal magical connection between two people, but it's trust in a single moment. And there's no act that shows more trust in another person than allowing their fists to be in your guts. It's really an underlining thesis of the whole thing. And I think it's a powerful ending. Unfortunately, it was too powerful. A lot of the versions historically released did cut that scene and just end with the newspapers saying that the boy was killed. But, that about wraps it up. It shows this deep discontent with capitalism. It shows his own sexual predilections, and it connects them in an interesting way. And I, of course, mentioned already that Salvador Dali was there. I forgot to mention at the screening, Groucho Marx was also at the screening. And unfortunately, I will have to end this very fun class with a brief addition of details about the midterm, which I think applies to only 2 of you. But just so you know, all midterms basically end up being due the week of, before fall break and sometimes after fall break. You could very easily, if you feel you have a lot of work, then, get a head start now because you have all the resources already if you want to do your midterm. And it's just going to be, what did I say, 2,000 or 1,000?
There was one that was 1,000 and one that was 2,000.
All right, we'll settle at 1,500.
I think
1,500 words. I know what 2,000. I'm not gonna word check you guys, but just about that amount of substance. Just a 5-minute analysis of any scene, sexual or non-sexual, in any movie we've covered, pornographic or non-pornographic. And if that could be sent in by the end of fall break, then you're grand. And that's all. Our screening this Friday is going to be Wakefield Poole's Bible. And it was the movie which almost totally destroyed his career. And I hope you all understand why pretty soon. But I'm sure you'll enjoy it more than his core audience did. So that's all for today. 5 minutes early, look at that.
Wow.
Anyone have any additional comments to hold back your peers before they're free to leave? Or
Bible is the best movie that we're gonna watch in this course.
yeah, show up
It
Friday.
wasn't even in
Guys.
the course last time.
It wasn't in the course, that's right. You were the only one that watched it.
Is it the Bible as Cecil B. DeMille never
Yes, it
filmed
is
it?
that movie.
Wow.
Promising.
Oh, 16 millimeters.
Sure. Is he a